Good evening. Welcome to the Got Ancient Wisdom live stream book reading thingy. Where we're gonna. I'm back at the base, back at the studio now. So I'm still tweaking a few things here. I've got a new graphics card that I'm going to try out later on when I've done the stream. I'm going to go and tinker with another computer that I've got set up. So there'll be another little tweak to come. But I've moved the camera a little bit, so we've got bit more of the desk, bit more. Can't really see much of the desk actually. Adjusted the audio a bit so that it's a bit clearer. I think it should sound a little bit more crisp. Yes, Ralph Hexham, back in my lair. That's right, back in my lair, in front of my bookshelf. Yeah, so the sound should be a bit more clear now. And image-wise, bit better. I do like the holiday setup because I think it's all like I never bother focusing the camera because it's a different camera that I'm using, so I never bother focusing it. So I like that. I do like that look where it's all just sort of like out of focus and a bit crappy looking. With the white background, with a plain white background. I do like that. And like the messy hair and all the rest of it. So what's been, anything important happened this week? Don't think so. I say this week, it's the beginning of the week, so nothing important. Can join the Telegram group still. I've added a chat in there so you can go in and chat if you feel like having a chat about anything. You four that are in there. And I'm gonna start putting together the whole book as like just chapters with no talking in between or anything, with no expanding on it, and just sort of do a clean read and then put them up as audio somewhere so that they're just available for people to download and listen as a whole book. We've got The Only Way Out Is In. Hello. And then Ralph Hexham, another week, still not jabbed. Yep. That's it. Why would you? I mean, the thing is, why would you be? Why would you be jabbed? What would be the point of getting jabbed? Unless you're really into that sort of stuff. You really like experimenting on your body and like, body modification or gene modification and all this sort of stuff. You only live once, so you might as well modify your body. Ralph, The Only Way Out Is In. Never worn a mask. Ralph, same, nor even tested. We are we're a good little group here. It's good. I mean, I'm sure there's other people listening or watching who have had it, and if you enjoy that sort of thing, like I say, go for it. But me, The Only Way Out Is In, and Ralph, not really into all that stuff. Cotton wool buds, masks, artificial augmentation. So anyway, last week I haven't got a candle either. If you've noticed, the candle's there, but it's not a light. So I don't know what that symbolises. That's some kind of symbol of something. So last week we finished on the part part 3 of chapter 10, which is Old and New Men, and that was about how the emergence of communism and socialism is, according to Stan, in some sense, a Neanderthal backlash. So it was those systems were a backlash of the suppressed side. I mean, actually, there is something actually that we're going to come up. Was going to come up in a later book, and I've been just started getting into this series of podcasts about Sasquatch, and that's quite interesting. That's if I don't know if anyone else is into the paranormal sort of stuff, proper paranormal stuff, not like Tartaria or Flat Earth. I mean, proper paranormal stuff. But yeah, anyway, the Sasquatch stuff, that's quite interesting. The only way out is in the candle not lit symbolizes no matches. Yes, that's a good point. No matches. We're running short on everything. But anyway, the Sasquatch stuff, that's quite interesting to listen to. Stan's theory on Sasquatch is that it's Neanderthal man and the Yeti, Bigfoot, whatever else. Yeah, we'll get into that later on, because he brings up Myra Shackley, who Myra Shackley also thought they was Neanderthals, and she was sort of silenced pretty quickly. And there seems to be a lot of silence in America of the real Bigfoot stuff, because one of the theories is that they're in all the national parks are fenced off areas where they've managed to contain these Bigfoots, or hominids of some kind, and that if they was to reveal that they existed, it would mean a lot of the wood cutting and all the and basically they'd be an endangered species, so they would have to stop a lot of the sort of capitalist stuff that they do with these areas, deep wooded areas that they use for forestation and cutting down and all this sort of stuff, digging. Oh, Ralph. So Ralph made the point that they are Neanderthals in Paranormies Telegram. Ralph, you're on it, my friend. Okay, so let's get on with because they've got, the other thing is they've got a language. If you listen to some of the podcasts, you can hear these quite famous recordings of them talking. So they are really advanced, and they live in caves. And so the Hollow Earth, my own theory on the Hollow Earth is that the Hollow Earth is actually just, they saw people coming out of the Earth and presumed that they was coming from some kind of land within the Earth, but I think they probably just lived in caves, and there's like big, vast cave structures in some places where Neanderthals went, and they a lot of their altars, they've got altars made of bear skulls that are Neanderthal altars that have been found. And well, I mean, if you look at the missing 411 stuff, the research by the policeman with the porn moustache, I can't remember his name, but he seems to have stumbled across some sort of Bigfoots that are hoarding human stuff like clothing and weapons, and so I wonder if they're actually preparing to take the overland. No, Neanderthals don't need vitamin D. Then the only way out is in. Well, we said, as we said earlier, there's some of the skeletons, the skeleton finds of Neanderthals, they have rickets. The bones are all bent, so that there's signs that they had lack of vitamin D because they were possibly nocturnal. But there's all, they also might eat the right food to get vitamin D. They might be eating animal livers or something. Yeah, I don't know. Just a theory. Cave dwellers and all the rest of it. Okay, so part 4 of chapter 10. A question which may or may not have occurred to the reader, but which is in any case a very fair one, is as follows. If System B is, as alleged, dominant in various members of the human community past and present, in the Neanderthaloids, in women, in children and so on, could one not expect to isolate and describe features which are common to all System B dominants of whatever persuasion? And if not, would that not leave the general theory of this book in a seriously weakened condition? As agreed, the demand is fair, and the purpose of this section is hopefully equally fair, to meet it. Since one of the intentions of the book is not so much to win arguments, but either to lay or raise certain ghosts once and for all, the skirmish will be fought over the area least susceptible to opinion and counter-opinion, and most susceptible to public objective measurement. That is, over purely physical and not over behavioural attributes. However, in passing, let us make one or two comments on the behavioural side. What common behaviours possibly characterise all System B dominance? Dreaming, either expressed as the proportion of dreaming sleep to orthodox sleep, or the absolute amount of time spent dreaming, is a probability. It seems that B dominants dream more. But how can one know whether the Neanderthaloids and the Paleoanthropics dreamt more? There are possible tangential approaches. Do, for example, the Australian Aborigines, probably the most paleoanthropic of present-day races, dream more than Western man? Furthermore, we know that Neanderthal had evolved a religion. Do, then, present-day religious and or superstitious people dream more than practical or atheistic individuals? Were that established, one would have some grounds for assuming it to hold for Neanderthal also. Another possibility is suggested by the word association data cited in Chapter 5. From that data, it seems that children more than adults and women more than men fail, no value judgment implied here, to come up with a word of opposite meaning when asked to free associate to a stimulus word. In some sense, then, children and women seem to perceive the world more holistically, certainly more associatively or gestalt-wise than do adult men, who apparently see the universe in terms of paired opposites. When considering ancient languages, we there found evidence of a tendency to use one and the same word for a concept and its opposite. That is, in a sense, a tendency to perceive as a whole what we today, as far as we see any link at all, perceive as the polarity of opposite qualities, and for which we therefore use two different words. Now, since the practice of using one word both for an object or an attribute and its opposite, A, increases as we go back in time, but B, even in the earliest recorded times, is an almost totally vanished process, have we not some grounds for assuming that practice to be of very great antiquity indeed, reaching back in origin, perhaps to the Paleoanthropics? In these tangential conditional terms, then, one sees again that it is possible to argue tentative behavioural parallels amongst System B dominants, ancient and modern. However, what I intend to concentrate upon here is the purely physical aspect. In moving into this frame of reference, without wishing to seem to make excuses, it is hoped that the reader appreciates the risk which this text is voluntarily running. One is putting what is actually an extremely subtle process of psychological interaction at risk too, and on trial by evidence obtained at the grossest physical level. Nonetheless, the robust hypothesis is rarely wholly destroyed by crude measurement or other weaknesses of experimental design. In the belief that the central hypothesis of this book is robust, I am, therefore, willing to take the risk. While it would be interesting to consider all the possible correlates of System B dominance, many of these are far from straightforward, either in their provenance or their actual manifestation, and would require therefore a great deal of prior debate. For such reasons, the list below includes only certain of the more straightforward items. In making statements about the attributes which are included, it must also be made quite clear that what is being discussed is the average or mean result to be obtained from the inspection of very large samples. One must not expect the proposals necessarily to hold in respect of any given individual, both because of the slightness of the effect as such, but more importantly because of the wide ranges of variability which are involved. These result in considerable overlap between samples of what is effectively a series of bimodal distributions. A second very important point is that when one uses the phrase larger than, one means in general relativity and not absolutely larger than. If one says, for example, that a woman's eyes are larger than a man's, one means larger in proportion to other aspects of or the rest of the skull in each case. One must sometimes be prepared for appearances to be deceptive. With this, the following proposals are now offered. The way to read the chart is to link any of the same numbered items in the extreme right and left-hand columns using any and all of the intervening central statements. So let me just find a graphic. Not those. Right, I think it's this one. It is proposed that, so now we have a chart, and on the left-hand column we have a list of System B dominant traits, and on the right-hand column we have a list of System A dominant traits, and in the middle we have a statement. So we have, for example, women have larger eyes than, so women on the left, and then in the middle we have larger eyes than, have larger mouths than, have larger palates than, have fuller lips than, have less prominent chins and externally less developed mandibles than, have more hair than, and are shorter than. So we have women on one side, men on the other, children on the left-hand side, adults on the right, Southeast Europeans on the left and West Europeans on the right, Asians on the left, Europeans on the right, Africans on the left, Europeans on the right, Neanderthaloids on the left, Cro-Magnons on the right, all Paleoanthropics on the left, all Neanthropics on the right, all and any individuals defined in any way as System B dominance on the left, and all and any individuals defined in any way as System A dominance, and neurotics on the left and psychotics on the right. Some of the further items one might have included in this list but have not by reasons of the various complications involved will no doubt occur spontaneously to the reader. A few points arising out of the list given urgently need comment. By larger eyes, do we mean larger eye sockets or simply somehow rather more prominent eyes? Probably both. Probably one means also, for instance, larger irises than, pupils capable of greater expansion than, and still other eye properties which need not be itemized here. In that context, however, one is impressed by such expressions as the soft-eyed lover or poet, wide-eyed innocence, come-to-bed eyes, eyes to drown in, and so on, and by the fact that women's face makeup seems, whatever else, always to have involved highlighting the eyes in one way or another, either by painting them directly or by not doing so in order that they stand out by contrast. The basic intention appears to remain the same even though the methods differ. One is impressed too by the prominence often given to eyes in tribal totems. On the other System A side, one encounters phrases like steely-eyed, flinty-eyed, hard-eyed, gimlet-eyed, beady-eyed, and so on. In that connection, one notes that interest in a subject or attention to an actual object is accompanied by a reduction in the size of the pupils, sometimes, of course, also by a visible narrowing and tightening of the whole eye musculature. It is a fact, too, that the eyes quite literally harden as one grows older. Presumably the eye, as a result, is smaller. These last observations begin to suggest the very complex interactions which seem to be taking place continuously at all levels within and without the personality. Larger mouths means larger mouths. Certain other features of the mouth, such as the tongue and teeth, would probably also bear closer inspection. One notes in passing that spinsters are frequently referred to as thin-lipped, as in also disapproval. The chin and the jaw mandible will be commented upon later in a more appropriate context. To state that e.g. children have more hair than adult men is a proposition which involves us in some difficulty. After all, adult men have beards and hair on their chest. Let us first put the matter somewhat out of context and say that the statement in question refers rather to something like the fact that a young kitten or any young mammal is fluffier than the adult cat. To make a quite specific within context claim, however, it is very likely that the hair of a group of adolescents or pre-adolescent boys, if allowed to grow to its fullest extent, would on average exceed the average length achievable by a group of adult men, if they similarly allowed their hair to grow to a maximum. A further point is that the adult male, even when he does not actually lose his hair, often evidences one version or another of the adult hairline, for example, the widow's peak. A child's hairline, aside from being usually rather less well defined, tends to be straight across and relatively low on the forehead. Hopefully, these brief observations on this subject will meet at least some of the reader's possible objections. Straight away, however, we are faced with further difficulties now in connection with height. There is no doubt at all that some of the tallest men in the world are African Negroes, not simply on an individual but on a whole tribe basis. This difficulty is readily admitted. One can make 2 points by way of partial defence. First, that some occasional traffic between the European and the African gene pool certainly occurred. Are the tall tribes northern rather than Central African? Second, that nonetheless the Negro average would still be lower overall than that of Europeans overall, amongst whom are included, for example, white North Americans and Australians. It is either dramatic or useful news that children... is it either dramatic or useful news that children are smaller than adults? Clearly not. The fact that women are shorter than men, all female mammals are smaller than male mammals, is equally self-evident. This, however, is less readily accounted for. In that connection, one question is asked. Is the size difference between male and female vertebrates as marked in species where the cerebellum is relatively large, e.g. in fish and birds, as it is in species where the cerebellum is less well developed? Put another way, does small stature, particularly in males, correlate with a large cerebellum and vice versa? Since allegedly all System B groups are shorter than all System A groups, it should be the case that the average height of, for instance, Socialist members of Parliament would be less than that of Conservative members of Parliament. However, even if that should be so, and I understand that this has already been demonstrated to be true, there are clearly many other factors affecting the results. The Labour government contains, for instance, considerably more Jews and Welshmen than the Conservative House, the former being in general shorter than Anglo-Saxons. Equally important, many socialist MPs have emerged from economically underprivileged backgrounds. Poor or merely less adequate nutrition in the formative years is known to exercise a constraining effect on the final height as an adult. Good evening, Trevorn. Rather more free of such considerations are our neurotic and psychotic group. On the argument being here proposed, hospitalised psychopaths in particular should prove taller than the national average and in particular taller than hospitalised neurotics. The term hospitalised is important, for while diagnostic methods differ somewhat from hospital to hospital, confining one's attention to the interned population gives at least some focus of standardisation to the undertaking. It would prove an easy matter for researchers to establish whether the average height of all hospitalised male neurotics in this country is below that of all hospitalised male psychotics, since this information already exists on hospital files. Would, one wonders, the neurotics also show a lower incidence of male pattern baldness than the psychotics? Doubtless that statistic is not recorded. A matter not so far considered at all in these pages is that of ears. One recalls first that Neanderthal was well endowed not only with visual but also with audial cortex. May one assume that above average powers of hearing would be accompanied by larger ears? It is impossible to be certain, of course, but it seems a reasonable assumption. One notes with no little satisfaction that dwarves, goblins, pixies and so on are very often drawn with large ears. A well-known Enid Blyton character has a name based on that fact. These are the kinds of links we have previously found significant. This is not to suggest that Neanderthal actually had pointed ears, but that they may have stood well away from the skull, especially at the top, or quite simply, they may just have been large. Observing one's fellow men, one notes that large ears appear to give the face a distinctly puckish appearance. Clark Gable provides a fairly good example. It would indeed be interesting if one could show that Labour MPs had larger ears than Conservatives and neurotics larger ears than psychotics. One could hardly explain that away by nutritional or other such simplistic factors. There is a concluding word to be said, namely about left-handedness, that will bring us to the next chapter. In addition, a renewed word of warning is in order in connection with what has been proposed in this section concerning System B and its manifestations. Sorry. I've got a bit of a cough because I've had the COVID, obviously. Every time you get ill now, it's just the COVID. So, I don't think it was the COVID, actually, because I was sneezing. That was it, yeah. But I probably got an enhanced immune system now as well, more enhanced than everybody else. There is a concluding word to be said, namely about left-handedness. Okay, this trend is not only sometimes entirely undetectable in a given or particular member of the sample, who is nevertheless by general definition a member of that group, but the individual in question may indeed show features nearer to the norm of an opposite group. This is due, amongst other things, to the wide range of variability involved. Neither does the presence of any one characteristic guarantee the presence of another. An individual might show a bewildering assortment of the anatomical, physiological and personality characteristics that have been discussed. Although the single phenomena have been discussed here in simplex terms, it is clear that their action and interaction must in reality be extremely subtle and extremely complex. Finally, the reader should remember a comment made in an earlier chapter, that System A and System B represent two universes of behaviour. Two System B individuals might therefore be totally unlike each other in many respects, perhaps unable even to communicate or relate to each other at all. There are, of course, certain general underlying principles which underpin all System B behaviour, and others which underpin all System A behaviour. These have been indicated at various points, and will be indicated still further. Were this not so, of course, one would be quite unable to define the systems. They would, in short, not exist. So what of left-handedness? This is an excellent topic to raise at this juncture, in view of what has just been said regarding the confusions and pitfalls which exist in the application of our general theory. For we argue left-handedness as a notable System B phenomenon, but are able to demonstrate it only in a mere 5% of the males and 3% of the female population. Worse, much worse, this allegedly System B characteristic has a higher incidence in System A group, men, than it does in its appropriate System B group, women. What can be done? There are suggestions from various sources that the proportion of left-handed individuals in the general population was once considered higher than it is now. The present book has, additionally, specifically proposed that left-handedness was more associated with the Paleoanthropics than the Neanthropics. The earlier notion that once large-scale or fairly continuous warfare became common, left-handers were at a disadvantage and were thus selectively bred out of the population over a period of many thousands of years, would neatly enough take care of the reduced number of left-handed males surviving. It does not at all account for the still greater drop in the numbers of left-handed women, especially when one expects this characteristic in any case to be sex-linked in favour of women. That fact alone should result in a higher incidence of left-handedness in females. Examining our own young, we find that all our children pass through a stage of ambidexterity, but do not pass through a stage of left-handedness. This establishes quite conclusively that sinistrality was never a biological stage passed through by Neanthropic man, at least not by the ancestors of currently surviving Neanthropic man. If contrariwise, the alleged left-handedness of past ages was, however, biological, and not just a cultural habit of some kind, then where has it gone now? To argue that this was a purely paleoanthropic biological or evolutionary stage, which largely disappears from the scene either by reason of the smallness of the paleoanthropic admixture in the Neanthropic ranks, or because right-handedness is genetically dominant when a right-hander mates with a left-hander, or both, would at best only partially answer the question. There remains the matter of the lower incidence of left-handedness amongst women. To lose or reduce the incidence of a genetically based attribute in a given population, one must literally and actually remove those particular genes from the gene pool. Thus, if one wished to prevent the occurrence of red-headed people, it would be necessary to kill all the red-headed individuals in every generation before they reach the stage of sexual maturity, or after that point to kill their children also. This is quite precisely what the animal breeder does. If he wishes, for example, to produce a straight-haired variety of a particular dog, he selects from each litter those with the naturally straightest coats, breeding then from these only, and always raising his standards of acceptability as time goes on. Fewer and fewer curly-haired animals are produced in each succeeding litter. Both Ralph's parents are left-handed, but you're not. And then Weltgeist Zubfade said, pointed ears, or Darwin's tubercle, is an archaic trait which monkeys have, but only some humans have. Got it. How then would it be if the last 50,000 years or more have seen various versions of the witch hunts, such as took place in Europe only a few centuries ago? These other witch hunts might have been organised or casual, thorough or careless, and intermittent or cyclic rather than continuous. The long-term effects, nonetheless, would be ultimately similar to those achieved by the more thoroughgoing methods of the breeder. And how, if in these ancient witch hunts, as in our more recent European ones, more women than men were the victims. And how, too, if amongst those so destroyed, there was always a higher proportion of left-handers. Would not this suggestion not only account in part for the general dearth of left-handers, but in particular for the dearth of left-handed women? Whatever else, one would imagine also that those so destroyed included a high proportion of the rather superior B dominance. Those, that is, gifted in the higher dream processes and other forms of knowledge too. In the diagram which follows, it is the item indicated by the hatched area which one deems to have suffered most from the genetic pruning we have envisioned. Don't know if I've got... Oh yeah, I've got it, yeah. So now it's a diagram with, on the left, the hatched area says higher dream processes, knowledge 2, and then off of that associative thinking and classical conditioning and the autonomic nervous system, ultimately. And then on the right hand side it says higher thought processes, knowledge 1, and then linear thinking, operant conditioning, and the central nervous system, ultimately. With this, we can turn at last to a direct examination of the nature of knowledge 2. Okay. So I'm just going to... That's the end of that chapter. So I'm just going to load up the next chapter. Hold on. This takes a little bit of time. Right, and then I'm just going to run this. Okay. So we're on chapter 11. We're probably about, we've probably got like only under a third left of the whole book. So yeah, done well. Everyone's done well. We've really got through it quite quick. Okay, so this is called the Momentary Universe. So we're on part 5 of the whole book now, The Rise to Tyranny of Western Consciousness. And we've got, we're on chapter 11, The Momentary Universe. And so what follows is a quote from Carl Jung, the foreword to the Eachine, or the Book of Changes. But how has this reaction come about? Because I threw 3 small coins in the air and let them fall, roll, and come to rest, heads or tails up, as the case might be. The odd fact that a reaction that makes sense arises out of a technique seemingly excluding all sense from the outset is the great achievement of the Eachine. The Chinese mind, as I see it at work in the Eachine, seems to be exclusively preoccupied with the chance aspects of events. What we call coincidence seems to be the chief concern of this particular mind, and what we worship as causality passes almost unnoticed. While the Western mind carefully sifts, weighs, selects, classifies, isolates, the Chinese picture of the moment encompasses everything down to the minutest nonsensical detail, because all of the ingredients make up the observed moment. This assumption involves a certain curious principle that I have termed synchronicity, a concept that formulates a point of view diametrically opposed to that of causality. It is a curious fact that such a gifted and intelligent people as the Chinese has never developed what we call science. Our science, however, is based upon the principle of causality, and causality is considered to be an axiomatic truth. Causal connection is statistically necessary and can therefore be subjected to experiment. Inasmuch as situations are unique and cannot be repeated, experimenting with synchronicity seems to be impossible under ordinary conditions. What we have called knowledge too is on view in the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, in the Upanishads of ancient India, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Eachine or Book of Changes of classical China, and in many, many other texts. Those mentioned are formalized and codified statements of knowledge too. Essentially, the same principles, however, are also embodied in the utterances of the Delphic oracle and other auguries, and at the lowest end of the scale in fortune-telling, astrology, crystal gazing, tea leaf reading, and palmistry. This latter statement will not do very much to warm the critical or skeptical reader to what follows. However, that is a risk we must take. The predisposition to skepticism may be somewhat tempered by the statement that Schopenhauer, for instance, fully acknowledged his debt to the Upanishads, and that Leibniz declared himself amazed by the purity of structure of the Eachine. C.G. Jung's admiration of this latter work may be discerned from the quotation at the head of this chapter. He said also, "For more than 30 years I have interested myself in the Eachine, for it seemed to me of uncommon significance. It is with a clear sense of the difficulties involved that one undertakes to convey anything of the import of even a single one of the works mentioned above in the short space of a part of one chapter. However, one trusts that limitations of the present book have already been sufficiently admitted. It is the Book of Changes, the Eachine, which we examine here. Richard Wilhelm, in his introduction, cites 4 authors of the Book of Changes. The first of these, Fu Si, is of great interest to us for reasons which follow, and as is perhaps the last, Confucius, by reasons of his reputation in the West. Fu Si is apparently a legendary figure representing the era of hunting and fishing and the invention of cooking. The suggestion is, in other words, that the first version, that is, some part of the Book of Changes, arrives in historical times with an already considerable antiquity behind it. There is, in fact, good reason to believe that the book existed as an oral tradition long before writing was introduced, placing the origin of the book in the era of hunting and the invention of cooking would give us the possibility of a staggeringly vast history. For, as was shown in the last chapter, man possessed fire, practiced cooking, and had permanent cave sites already by 500,000 BP. Coincidentally or otherwise, some of the most important sites of Homo erectus are found in the vicinity of Peking. However, in fact, we have no particular justification for placing the origins of the Eachine at the beginning of the vast period in question. Nevertheless, Wilhelm also concurs that the linear signs of the Book of Changes ascribed to Fu Si have been held to be of such antiquity that they antedate historical memory. Moreover, the 8 trigrams of the book have names that do not occur in any other connection in the Chinese language, and because of this they have even been thought to be of foreign origin. At all events, they are not archaic characters. Compare in this connection the unknown origin of the pre-Greek word labyrinth. 2 collections of trigrams are known to have been associated with 2 dynasties of antiquity, one traditionally dated 2205 to 1766 BC, and the other 1766 BC to 1150 BC, or 4000 and 3500 BP approximately. Thus the great age of the Eachine is undoubted. Before attempting to say what the Book of Changes is, one further comment may be made concerning its antiquity. The oldest text and interpretations contain a symbolism or ellipsis of so compacted a nature that without the bridging commentaries and elucidations of later sages such as Confucius, it is unlikely that we today could make much of them. We may liken the old text to the very ancient collapsed dwarf stars, where a cubic inch of matter commonly weighs 5 tons. The items in question here are, as it were, dwarf dreams, as are, of course, the trigrams and hexagrams themselves, containing a densely compressed mass of observation. Such compacting itself argues a long period of existence. 3 short pieces from the text are here given by way of example. One must bear in mind, however, that what one is reading is a translation. Inevitably, much is lost in the transfer, nor are these symbolic images in general part of our own tradition. So this is a reading from the Eachine. It's from number 27, E, the corners of the mouth. Return, success, going out and coming in without error. Friends come without blame. To and fro goes the way. On the 7th day comes return. It furthers one to have somewhere to go. Sorry, that's from 24, which is fu, or return. If you walk in the middle and report to the prince, he will follow. It furthers one to be used in the renewal of the capital. And that's from number 42, E, increase. You let your magic tortoise go and look at me with the corners of your mouth drooping. Misfortune. And that's from 27, E, the corners of the mouth. It is easy to dismiss this material as charming nonsense, or as of so obscure or ambiguous a nature as to be valueless. The Book of Changes is in essence a collection of linear signs which, when used as oracles, provide answers to questions asked of the book. The book is equally a non-oracular account of the nature of the universe. To this aspect we turn later. In the most ancient times there were probably only two lines, an unbroken line meaning yes, and a broken line meaning no. Later, the single lines were combined in pairs to yield more differentiation, 4 possibilities in all instead of 2. Later again, a third line was added to each of these combinations to produce the 8 basic trigrams that were associated with Fu Hsi. With the existence of 8 trigrams, one has reached a degree of complexity that is not only capable of considerable subtlety, but which is becoming hard to conceptualize or hold in the mind in its entirety. It will be realized that by this time the basic broken and solid lines no longer had the simple negative and positive qualities of no and yes that they started out with. Indeed, it was probably felt at the time that the 8 trigrams encompassed all that was happening in the universe, and as, or because, the trigrammatic signs readily changed into each other by the alteration of single lines, so it was felt too that the transitional and constantly changing nature of the universe was reflected. Each of the 8 trigrams in time acquired particular attributes of various kinds. Thus, for instance, they represent a family consisting of a father, mother, 3 sons and 3 daughters. These, incidentally, are in no sense supernatural or godlike beings. They represent functions or roles. Further attributes of the trigrams are not of direct interest here, but one will not be surprised, will perhaps be pleased, to learn that the image of the father is heaven and that of the mother earth. The name of the father is creative and that of the mother receptive. The basic system, the 8 trigrams, appears for a time to have met the needs of the day-to-day users of the oracle and of the philosophers who were systematically extending man's understanding of the universe with the conceptual tools and conceptual possibilities provided. One can already see clearly how radically such a subjective view of the universe must differ from one that is empirically based. In the course of further time, nevertheless, the degree of subtlety and complexity offered by the trigrams was felt or found to be inadequate. The 8 trigrams were recombined with one another at a very early date to yield the 64 hexagrams of the evolved Eachine. At a very early date means prior to 4000 BP. Not, however, that one needs to imagine the 64 hexagrams appearing overnight, least of all as the product of a conscious decision by any one individual. It is likely that the evolution of the full complement of hexagrams was itself an extended process. The kinds of subtlety and complexity which result or become possible in the fully evolved Eachine are now of an order where a man may study his whole life without having grasped more than part of the total concept. Above this, there was the practical application of the philosophy in everyday life, its translation into the minutiae of individual existence and its problems and situations, trivial or otherwise, high or low, which was a further universe of study, somewhat resembling the practice of psychoanalysis in our own day. The foregoing is not in any sense offered as evidence of the value or validity of the Book of Changes. There is nothing to prevent one regarding it still as a very complex folly, as a tragic monument perhaps to the wasted energies of a considerable section of humanity over a considerable period. However, let us revert to the basic concepts of the philosophy of the Eachine. The foundation on which the whole ultimately rests and from which it develops is the duality of the broken and the whole line, the negative and the positive, in Chinese the concepts of yin and yang respectively. The primary meaning of yin is the cloudy, the overcast. Yang means literally banners waving in the sun, that is, something shone upon or bright. How well these terms align themselves with the terms which describe System B and A respectively in Chapter 3. Dark, light, night, day, and so on. Indeed, all these and many other terms are applied to and in herein the concepts of yin and yang. As pointed out, yin and yang are also mother and father, female and male. Moreover, it is certainly no accident that in the habitual phrase yin precedes yang, the female precedes the male. As we know, System B is older than System A in evolutionary terms and is the primal part of the personality. In all this, we have clear evidence that we are in System B country. That is, we are observing personality through the eyes and from the standpoint of the unconscious, and in terms of the intuitive. In the original text and in the very oldest of the commentaries, however, yin and yang are not used. Instead, the two expressions used are the yielding and the firm. These, of course, align equally well with our general concept of System B and System A, for in general, the character of the female is yielding and that of the male firm or dominant. One may state the matter still more literally, however. The yielding is also the opening and softening of the vagina in preparation for intercourse, just as the firm is the hardened, erect penis. The text and some commentaries of the book are, I suggest, often most clearly understood in these terms. There is no doubt in my own mind that the oldest layers of the Eachine are very close to this primal symbolism. This fact further argues for the great antiquity of the text and philosophy of the Eachine. The Book of Changes is both an oracle and a book of wisdom. As the latter, it attempts a description of life and the universe and the meaning of the universe. As the former, it is a visionary power to be consulted in times of distress or in the face of difficulties of any kind. With this, we appear to have entered the area of mumbo-jumbo, ignorant superstition and magical divination, and indeed we have. It is not easy to convey one's own convictions about and experiences with the Eachine, even to an open-minded and neutral observer, let alone to the skeptic. However, for what it may be worth, I offer one example of an experience with the Book of Changes, which the reader is free to take or leave as he thinks fit. The situation described by the example will be a familiar one to those who know and have employed the Eachine, an instance of the astonishing accuracy which, the devotees of the book agree, is displayed in the large majority of applications of the book to a problem. It is, naturally, permissible to regard both myself, as well as many others, as misguided, even though well-meaning. This is the reader's prerogative. Let me just. I'm going to get to the comments in a minute. I can see comments coming up, so I'm just going to finish this bit. It is naturally permissible. The original method of consulting the oracle is a somewhat complicated one, involving a series of arithmetical and ritualistic exercises with a large number of yarrow stalks. However, a later and simpler method exists involving the use of only 3 coins, as described in the opening quotation at the head of this chapter. The purpose of this method, in both cases, appears to be to make quite certain that the choice of text which is produced is wholly random and completely beyond the control of the subject. One notes, incidentally, that such methods as sticking a pin in the list of numbers or horses' names, or opening a book at random, which are well-known methods of producing a chance consultation, are not truly random, since for obvious reasons the beginning and end of the book or list tend to be neglected. The coin method of consulting the Eachine involves throwing the coins high in the air and allowing them to bounce and settle at will. The face side of the coin is yin, with a numerical value of 2, and the reverse side is yang, with a numerical value of 3. One throws the coins 6 times in all. The further details of the method may be obtained from the Eachine itself. Now to the example. An acquaintance of the author's had been married for 2 years. His relationship with his wife was and is a difficult one, both parties being not only very dogmatic, but quite opposite in their views on most matters. Despite their apparently genuine affection, or at least need, for each other, the relationship is in continual danger of foundering and imposes a great strain on both participants. On the occasion in question, the man, John, turned up at the author's flat in an acutely withdrawn and defeated state, relatively helpless in the face of the situation, as one frequently is. I suggested the use of the Eachine. Except by name, the book was unknown to John. Without enthusiasm, he agreed to the consultation. After I had explained the use of the coins to him, a text reference was obtained. This he read in silence for some time. Eventually, John put the book down. The first words he said tend to be echoed in one form or another by most of those who come into contact with the Eachine under these conditions. He asked if he could go through the process again to see if the first one was just a fluke. A second reading on any one occasion, however, is not normally allowed, since moments only occur once, and the reading for that moment has already been issued. This aspect of the matter will be discussed again. The text and commentary which John afterwards showed me comprised a detailed discussion of the relationship of man and woman. questions of following and leading, the psychological strains imposed on both parties in attempts to manipulate or control, and much else of a similar nature. The details are, in a sense, unimportant. What is important is John's own view that the text for him exactly described my relationship with Carol. No doubt, many will find the foregoing singularly unimpressive, or concede that, while interesting, it proves nothing. I would indeed myself agree that the validity or meaning of the procedure and the experience can never be finally demonstrated at second hand, though one can recognise someone else's experience as being an example of what one has already experienced oneself. In the first instance, conviction can be achieved only by means of one's own personal experience with the phenomenon. Here one sees that the process involved is wholly and diametrically opposite to the criterion demanded by modern science of objective and repeated demonstration of findings under controlled and circumscribed conditions, and that these phenomena are, by definition, untestable by such means. Again, we revert to Jung's words. Experimenting with synchronicity seemed to be impossible under ordinary conditions. In the Eachine, the only criterion of the validity of synchronicity is the observer's opinion that the text of the hexagram amounts to a true rendering of his psychic condition. With this, we may again broaden the discussion and undertake a consideration of the meaning of coincidence, or to use Jung's term, synchronicity. So, let's stop there. Very interesting. Let's just have a look at the chat quickly. Ralph wants to be a paperback writer. Good. Right. So Ralph's saying, so Stan knew what was up in China before the Tarim Basin mummies were found. DNA confirmed European in 2007. Yeah, I don't remember ever showing him that actually, but that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't remember him ever talking about that actual confirmation. The confirmation of being European. There was a lot of things that he was very much in the past. You know, he didn't have a computer. I used to take him to the library just to show him how many times his name came up when you typed it in Google, and that just excited him alone. But beyond that, you know, actually getting him to use the internet or to try and do anything modern was near on impossible. But yeah, I think, you know, what his theory is sort of it's built up on top of like other information. So some of the stuff, I think he just comes to a logical conclusion. You know, he's distilling, you know, things like behavior and distills it down so far that you get to the point where you're like, okay, he's found a sort of, someone described it to me once as a basic. That's what they would call it in Scientology or something, you know, that he's discovered the basic behind everything, behind all the ideas. He's discovered like a sort of the basic premise for all ideas. And that idea is that we're a hybrid, and that's, you know, and so once you know that basic, you can sort of extrapolate out and you know, work out a lot of other stuff just from that. So it's like having a principle in nature. You know, the principle of humans is, according to Gooch's work, the principle of nature, of human nature, is that we are a hybrid, and all of the connotations of that principle, everything has to be viewed from the perspective that we are a hybrid. So every behavior, action, event, historic event, whatever it is, has to be viewed from the the basic understanding that we are a hybrid. So whether you're looking at war or whether you're looking at inventions, religion, science, whatever, you've got to always just take it from the basic is that we are a hybrid. Yeah, so hope that sort of helps. But the Eachine thing, I mean, maybe I'll bring a copy of the I Ching. I don't know how many people have done an I Ching reading before or have got a copy of the I Ching. Stan was always using the I Ching, even up to probably like in the year before he died. And I've used it for a lot of things. So I'll bring it in and we can do a reading about something. You can just pick anything in history. You can pick any moment in time. It just gives you a reading of a moment in time. So we could just pick an event and work out try and get a possible outcome of an event. So if there's like a world event that happens or a local event, we could do a reading on that and find out what the I Ching has to say about the outcome of that event. Yeah, we'll try that. Anyway, that's my hands going onto the laptop. The candle just looks like bog roll without horse races. No, because later on we're gonna touch on the horse races because there's a famous case of and you can probably find it on YouTube actually. What's it called on YouTube? It's called the Dream Me a Winner, I think it's called, and it might have been I think it's a program with Michael Aspel. Let me have a look. Dream Me a Winner. It's called Leap in the Dark, the TV series. A 1970s docudrama series of 6 investigations into the paranormal called Leap in the Dark. And the episode is called Dream Me a Winner. And it's about Lord Kilbracken, who dreamt the winning horses and gave his even ended up giving his friends the horse names that he was dreaming of, and they all won as well. So everybody was a winner. So he was dreaming them for a period of time, dreaming the winners of horse races. And it was validated by the fact that other people won money on the same horses as well. But that's worth looking at. Good little, slice, and it's a nice slice of the past as well if you watch it. The whole TV series Leap in the Dark. It might it might be a Colin Wilson thing actually. Oh Jesus, what is she? Yeah, introduced by Colin Wilson. Oxford 1946, Lord Kilbracken. Then John Godley, a student at Balliol, goes to sleep and takes a glimpse into the future. Yeah. Yeah, but go and check it out if you have got nothing else to do. I'll post it in the Telegram. I'll post it in the Telegram group. So, go join the Telegram group if you want a link to it, or just find the link yourself. Okay, candle looks like top of a pint of Guinness. Yep. Right, I'm going to go anyway, so I can get some sleep and just finally get rid of this Not get rid of this bit of COVID, finally integrate this bit of COVID. Right, okay. So good sesh, everyone. And I'll see you all next week.